The heavy iron gates groaned open, a sound Elias had imagined countless times during his confinement. But nothing had prepared him for the sharp chill of the London air, mingled with the distant cries of street vendors and the clatter of horse-drawn carriages. As he stepped beyond the prison threshold, the familiar fog was pierced by streaks of reluctant sunlight, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward a future uncertain yet promising. Faces emerged in the crowd, some weathered by hardship, others softened by hope. Marguerite was among the first to reach his side, her eyes a balm of quiet strength. "Welcome back, Elias," she whispered, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The years of struggle, sacrifice, and solitude had etched themselves into his frame, but in that moment the weight seemed to lift just enough to breathe. The city had changed. The once rigid and suffocating grief garments now bore signs of transformation, simpler cuts, lighter fabrics, and subtle embellishments that spoke not of despair, but of remembrance and resilience. Children darted through the streets, their laughter unburdened by the heavy folds that previously marked sorrow as a public shackle. Elias's thoughts drifted to those lost along the way, the apprentices betrayed, the friends imprisoned, the countless souls who had borne grief both visible and invisible. Yet, amidst the ruins of the past, a fragile hope had taken root. That evening, in the dim warmth of a back room tucked away from prying eyes, Elias and Marguerite pored over letters and sketches. "The garments must honor grief without imprisoning it," she said, tracing a pattern with a careful finger. "Your vision has sparked something more than rebellion. It has opened hearts." Their whispered plans wove together strands of healing and defiance, a tapestry to cloak the future. Days later, Lélis found himself within the ornate walls of Sir Alistair Fenton's estate. The grandeur of the room was a stark contrast to the humble workshop he once called home. Yet beneath the velvet and crystal, he perceived a shared sorrow, a gilded cage housing unspoken losses. Sir Alistair's candid words revealed a man torn between privilege and the weight of expectation. "Change is inevitable, Elias," he admitted, "but the true test lies in how society embraces it." Walking the familiar streets, Elias observed the shifting landscape of mourning. The city breathed with tentative freedom, its people learning to wear grief not as armor, but as a quiet emblem of love and memory. The journey ahead remained fraught with challenges, but for the first time in many years, the path seemed illuminated by more than mere shadows. As twilight settled, Elias paused beneath a gas lamp's glow, the light flickering like the fragile flame of hope within him. The legacy of a tailor who dared to unravel the threads of sorrow was no longer confined to whispered tales. It was woven into the very fabric of London's soul, awaiting the next chapter to be stitched with courage and compassion. The road forward was uncertain, but Elias knew that grief, unshackled and unadorned, could finally be felt in its purest form, not worn, but lived. And so, as the city exhaled the breath of a new dawn, the tailor who had once been an outlaw of emotion stepped quietly into the legacy he had wrought, one stitch, one soul, one hope at a time. The morning light crept softly through the tall, arched windows of the new workshop, washing the modest room in a gentle glow that Elias had not seen in many years. The scent of fresh linen and lavender subtly mingled with the faintest trace of ink and wool, stirring a quiet sense of promise within him. He stood at the threshold, fingers tracing the worn brass handle of the door, a symbol of a new beginning forged from years of hardship and clandestine defiance. The workshop was unlike the cramped, shadowed backrooms of his past, where secrets were whispered between threads and needles. Here, the air was lighter, the space open, with shelves neatly lined with bolts of fabric in hues soft and inviting rather than somber and oppressive. Pale blues, gentle grays, and muted greens replaced the heavy blacks and deep purples that once dominated the morning attire of Victorian London. Martha was already at work, her nimble fingers threading a needle with precision. She glanced up, offering Elias a quick smile, the kind that spoke of shared purpose and unspoken understanding. "I've begun stitching the first of the new designs," she said quietly, her voice steady but infused with a tender excitement. "They're soft, flexible, easier to wear, kinder to the skin." Elias nodded, moving toward a work table where a sketchbook lay open. pages filled with delicate embroidery patterns inspired by nature's quiet resilience, willows bending in the wind, blooming forget-me-nots, and intertwined ribbons symbolizing connection rather than confinement. Each design was a deliberate rejection of the rigid, suffocating customs that had long dictated the city's approach to grief. Later, Reverend Alden arrived, his presence both reassuring and invigorating. The clergyman's eyes held the wisdom of years spent counseling the bereaved, and yet they sparkled with the possibility of change. "Elias," he said, folding his hands respectfully, "your vision honors the sorrow of loss without chaining the soul. This is a path toward healing many have long yearned for but dared not speak aloud." They spoke at length about the evolving role of mourning in society, how grief need not be a spectacle of suffering but could instead become a private, dignified process supported by garments that comfort rather than constrain. Reverend Alden's support was a beacon, signaling that even the pillars of tradition might bend toward compassion. The first clients arrived in the afternoon, a small, cautious group who represented a cross-section of the city's mourners seeking relief from the heavy expectations of their social station. Among them was Mrs. Latham, a widow whose dignified grace had been dimmed by years of wearing the traditional garments that seemed to weigh down not just the body, but the spirit. As they tried on the new garments, a remarkable transformation occurred. Laughter, soft and genuine, broke the usual solemnity. The fabrics felt like a gentle embrace, allowing movement and breath where once there had been rigidity and suffocation. The embroidery whispered stories of resilience, memory, and hope, weaving a new narrative where grief was acknowledged but not imprisoned. Elias observed quietly, the corners of his mouth lifting into a rare smile. This was the moment he had fought for, a reshaping of sorrow that honored the past without being shackled by it. As twilight descended, Elias gathered his small assembly for a modest unveiling. Before them lay a garment unlike any other, light as a whisper, embroidered with symbols of endurance and healing, its colors a soft harmony of blues and grays that seemed to pulse with quiet strength. He spoke with steady conviction. This is not merely clothing but a new language of mourning. A language that allows sorrow to be felt, remembered, and ultimately transformed. Let us step forward from the shadows of enforced grief into the light of compassionate remembrance. The room was silent for a moment, then filled with murmurs of approval and hope. Elias's heart swelled with the knowledge that this was only the beginning, that the threads he wove today might one day reshape the sorrow of an entire city. Yet, as the last light faded from the sky, a single question lingered in Elias's mind. Could this fragile new fabric of mourning truly withstand the weight of tradition, or would it unravel beneath the pressures of a society still bound by its old grief? With hands steady and spirit undimmed, Elias prepared for the journey ahead, knowing that every stitch he made was a step toward freedom for himself, and for all who dared to mourn without chains. The dawn cast a pale light over the narrow streets of London, filtering softly through the stained glass windows of Elias's new workshop. It was a modest space, yet filled with quiet energy, the hum of sewing machines, the rustle of fabric, and the soft murmur of voices sharing stories and hopes. Here, grief was no longer a heavy shackle, but a cloth to be shaped and reshaped. A living garment that could bend, breathe, and evolve with the wearer. Miriam sat by the window, her fingers deftly guiding a length of midnight blue silk through the needle. The fabric was light, almost ethereal, embroidered delicately with silver threads that caught the morning light like faint stars. "This," she said softly, "will move with her, not against her." No corsets, no crushing layers, just the memory of loss, held gently. Elias nodded, his eyes tracing the patterns. Exactly, mourning should not be imprisonment but a companion. One that walks beside you, not behind iron bars of expectation. Outside, the city was stirring. Word of Elias's work had crossed the river and the hills, reaching ears in distant towns and villages. One such place was a bustling coastal market where Sanjay, a merchant with a keen eye for both tradition and change, prepared to introduce his own adaptation of Elias's mourning garments. The market was a kaleidoscope of colors and voices, fishermen bartering, children chasing one another, women displaying vibrant textiles. Among them, Sanjay stood proudly beside a stand draped in fabrics both somber and bright. blending the local customs with the subtle innovations championed by Elias. Mourning cloaks woven with flax and dyed in shades of ocean blue, scarves embroidered with motifs of waves and renewal, hats trimmed with feathers symbolizing flight from sorrow. As the crowd gathered, murmurs of curiosity and admiration rippled through the air. Sanjay addressed them with warmth. "We honor our losses not by weight but by the stories our garments tell. Through these threads, grief becomes a part of our lives, not a chain." Back in London, Lydia prepared for an event that promised to be a turning point. The gallery was alive with anticipation, the air thick with the scent of oil paints and fresh paper. Lydia, ever the fierce spirit, stood before a large mural that dominated the wall, a sweeping canvas where shadow and light intertwined, sorrow blossoming into vibrant hues of renewal. The crowd was hushed as the curtain fell away, revealing the image of a figure shedding a cloak of dark fabric, stepping into a garden awash with blossoms. The mural spoke without words, capturing the essence of Elias's vision. Grief was not a prison but a passage. Eyes glistened with tears and hope. Whispers of freedom and new beginnings wove through the room like a gentle breeze. Meanwhile, in the quiet sanctuary of a small chapel, Father Ambrose led a service unlike any other. The mourners wore garments unlike the rigid black that once dominated their appearances. Instead, soft grays, deep blues, and muted purples swayed with their movements, embroidered with symbols of memory and hope. The priest's voice was calm, carrying a prayer for those who grieved and for those who sought release. "May we remember without being bound, mourn without being silenced, and live with the weight of sorrow lightened by love." Elias watched the gathering through a window, a gentle smile touching his lips. His journey had taken him far beyond the cramped backroom where he first loosened a seam in secret. Now his vision was a tide rolling across the land, reshaping the contours of mourning itself. Yet, even amid this blossoming change, he felt the lingering pull of the old world, the ceremonies steeped in rigid tradition, the police who still chased shadows of defiance, the whispered fears of those clinging to familiar grief. But for the first time in many years, Elias believed the cloth of sorrow could be rewoven into something new, a tapestry that held space for freedom, for expression, for healing. As evening fell, the city's lamplighters began their rounds, casting pools of golden light on cobblestones slick with recent rain. Elias returned to his workbench, fingers steady and heart resolute. Tomorrow would bring more stitches, more stories, and more souls ready to embrace a new kind of mourning. The new cloth was being woven, thread by thread, heart by heart. And with it a future where grief was felt deeply but worn lightly. But the question lingered, like a whisper in the night, how far would the old powers go to unravel this fragile fabric of change? Elias knew the journey was far from over. Yet, in the steady rhythm of needle and thread, hope was sown anew. And so, beneath the flickering gaslight, the tailor of sorrow prepared to face whatever dawn might bring, armed not with weapons, but with the transformative power of the new cloth. The gas lamps flickered softly along the cobbled square, casting a pale glow over the assembled crowd. A mist hovered low, weaving through the gathered bodies like a whispered secret. Elias stood at the center, atop a wooden platform hastily constructed for this singular occasion. His heart thundered in his chest, each beat echoing the weight of the moment. Before him, a heavy velvet curtain hung, concealing the garment that he had poured his soul into crafting, a symbol not just of clothing, but of a new era in mourning. Around him, the murmur of voices ebbed and flowed. Many faces were veiled with skepticism, some with curiosity, and a few with genuine hope. The years of hardship, of clandestine stitches and whispered trades, had led to this fragile public unveiling. Elias's gaze swept over the crowd and landed briefly on Lady Miriam Ashcombe, her pale face serene yet charged with emotion. She gave him a subtle nod and unspoken encouragement that steadied him. Clearing his throat, Elias stepped forward, the wooden boards creaking beneath his worn boots. "Good people of London," he began, his voice steady, though laced with the tremors of passion. "We have long borne the heavy mantle of grief, not only in our hearts, but upon our backs. Today I present not a garment of sorrow, but a cloak of hope, a testament that mourning need not bind, but may also free. A hush settled over the crowd, the weight of his words pressing upon them. Inspector Graves stood at the edge of the assembly, his usual stern demeanor slightly softened, eyes narrowed, not in suspicion but in contemplation. The morning police had long enforced the strict codes of grief attire, policing the outward expressions of inward pain. Elise's act was a direct challenge to their authority, a bold defiance that risked everything. With deliberate care, Elias grasped the curtain's edge and pulled. The fabric fell away to reveal a garment unlike any seen before, a resplendent piece woven from black silk interlaced with delicate threads of gold and silver that caught the lamplight like stars caught in night's embrace. The bodice bore intricate embroidery of blooming layla and soaring phoenixes, their forms entwined in a dance of renewal. It shimmered with a quiet radiance, embodying not just the pain of loss, but the promise of rebirth. Gasps rippled through the crowd, some eyes widened in disbelief. Others glistened with unshed tears. Mrs. Adelaide Finch, standing near the front, brushed a trembling hand across her lips, a fragile smile breaking through her grief. She had been one of Elias's earliest clients, her own mourning garment transformed by his subtle alterations into something lighter, something bearable. Elias continued, his voice gathering strength. This is the Phoenix Veil, a garment that honors the depth of sorrow while embracing the possibility of healing. It is for those who mourn not to chain them in endless despair, but to remind them that from ashes, life can rise anew. A ripple of applause broke out, hesitant at first, then growing with fervor. Lady Miriam stepped forward, her voice clear and steady as she added, "For too long, our society has dictated the outward signs of grief, shackling the soul to rigid customs. Today, we witness the birth of a new understanding where mourning is a personal journey, not a public performance." Inspector Graves's gaze remained fixed on Elias, the lines of his face betraying a complexity of thought. Though bound by duty, he could not deny the stirring in his chest, the recognition that perhaps the old ways were due for change. He inclined his head in a silent, grudging respect. As the ceremony drew to a close, Elias felt the weight of countless eyes upon him, not with suspicion or scorn, but with a dawning respect. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with resistance and the ghosts of tradition, yet in this moment a seed of transformation had been sown. He stepped down from the platform, the crowd parting before him like a tide shifting in motion. Whispers of hope and questions of possibility swirled around him, mingling with the crisp night air. The final fitting had been made, not just of cloth, but of a future where grief might be worn with dignity or perhaps not worn at all. And as Elias disappeared into the misty streets, the faintest smile touched his lips, for he knew this was but the beginning of a revolution stitched in threads of courage and compassion. The city held its breath, poised on the edge of change. The chill of dawn crept quietly over the rooftops of London, painting the city in soft, muted hues that whispered of change. I found myself alone atop the familiar heights overlooking the tangled streets and chimneys, a sprawling sea of sorrow and hope intertwined. The fog, once a thick shroud obscuring every corner, was lifting now, revealing the first tentative brushstrokes of light. It was a fragile dawn, much like the fragile promise that had carried me through these long years. I breathed deeply, the crisp morning air filling my lungs, carrying with it the sense of damp stone and distant hearth fires. Below me, the city stirred, some still cloaked in the heavy fabrics of enforced mourning, others daring to shed those bindings, stepping into a new world where grief might be felt but no longer worn as a chain. This was the world I had fought for, the world I still struggled to shape. In the years past, I had been but a simple tailor, stitching the garments of sorrow for those bound by society's stern dictates. Yet beneath the measured hems and black silks, I had nurtured a quiet rebellion, a yearning for liberation, not just of fabric, but of spirit. The journey had been perilous, marked by betrayal, loss, and the relentless gaze of those who sought to maintain the status quo. But through the shadows, a movement had grown, born on whispered hopes and clandestine stitches. Today marked the culmination of that journey. Descending from the rooftop, I entered the workshop that Marianne and I had transformed from a cramped backroom into a sanctuary of healing. The space was alive with the gentle hum of creation, the soft rustle of silks, the faint scrape of needles against fabric, the murmur of shared purpose. The air was tinged with the delicate fragrance of lavender and fresh linen, scents chosen to soothe the restless heart. Marianne looked up from her workbench, her eyes meeting mine with a warmth that steadied the storm within. "Are you ready?" she asked softly, her voice a balm to my frayed nerves. I nodded, the weight of years settling into a quiet resolve. "It is time." Together we prepared the garment, no longer a shackle of mourning, but a tapestry of collective healing. Its design was revolutionary, woven threads of soft grays and gentle blues, embroidered with symbols of renewal and remembrance, crafted to honor sorrow without suffocating the soul. It was a garment that invited comfort rather than command, freedom rather than fear. Word had spread swiftly of the public unveiling. Crowds gathered in the square, a motley assembly of faces, some skeptical, others hopeful, many uncertain. The heavy clatter of boots and rustle of old grief garments were slowly giving way to murmurs of curiosity, tentative steps toward acceptance. As I stepped forward, the murmurs hushed, a palpable tension rippling through the gathering. Holding the garment aloft, I felt the weight of countless stories woven into its fabric, the silent tears, the whispered prayers, the quiet courage of those who dared to hope. "This is not merely cloth," I began, my voice steady despite the tremors beneath. "It is a symbol, a testament to the resilience of the human heart. No longer must grief be worn as a prison. It may be felt deeply and truly, but it need not bind us in chains of fabric and fear." The crowd responded not with words, but with a profound silence, a shared recognition of the truth laid bare before them. In that moment, the rigid structures of mourning began to unravel, thread by thread. As the sun climbed higher, children played freely nearby, their laughter clear and unburdened by the weight of sorrow's apparel. Their bright clothes fluttered like flags of a new era, one where grief was a private journey, not a public decree. I watched them, a quiet smile touching my lips. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges yet unseen. But for the first time in many years, I believed in a future where sorrow could be embraced without being worn, a future where the heart alone bore its pain, free and unshackled. And as the city breathed anew beneath the soft light of dawn, I knew my work was not yet done. But the first stitch of change had been sewn, and the tapestry of hope was beginning to unfold. The night may still hold shadows, but the dawn was coming, unclothed in grief, radiant in possibility. And so, with steady hands and a hopeful heart, I stepped forward into the new day.